Alrighty. I need a set of 32 of these to make a 4 by 4 quilt top. So I'm going to have two of them, 2 of these sets to make sure that we have enough, which would be 32. So, I still got a ways to go. And I'm going to see if I can't go ahead and cut me out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Crabby crap. What's 4 times 4, Rick?
16.
15?
16.
16. Alrighty. So, let's see if I can't cut me out 16 of these as I go. So, that way I can go ahead and get them done as I go. And when I get 15 and I get these all together, then we can get busy and make our quilt.
Oppressive regime, they build these, because it's like everybody knows what looks good. Everyone, they'll try to say now, oh, this is subjective, but it's like, what looks good and what doesn't. I'm sure that everybody who's gone to like Washington, D.C. is impressed with the architecture. Go see something new they built there. It looks like, like everybody would objectively say that looks like garbage. And the funny thing I was thinking, I was literally just in Raleigh, North Carolina, and that's not obviously like DC, but it is to a certain extent. It's a much smaller version of it. And I thought, like, as somebody like me who's skeptical of things, all I want is some kind of an explanation. I want them to mention it. I want them to mention that they used to build better things, but they never, you never get anybody in public admit that. That in the 1800s, for some reason, they built better things than we do today. Like, if there was a reason why they could, and if anybody says money, we know they got the money printing machine and they build whatever they want. They don't mind throwing money down a hole these days. Back then, there was no Federal Reserve where they could not have just printed money. So they actually had to do it with whatever. I mean, we're told, basically being more technologically advanced, we should be able to build the same things cheaper and faster. But that's not the case. And then that's when you really start to see how stupid some of this stuff is, when you see the 1-year timelines on these buildings. Like, they built even like the Empire State Building, which is funny. To go back to what we were saying, Fort Jefferson, 16 million bricks. There's 10 million bricks in the Empire State Building. So just think, for scale wise, like, to think about that. Wow. So we're told that they built the Empire State Building in 1 year. How? Like, how could they do that back in, like, I think it was like 1931 or something like that, like right around 1930. Like, how could they do that in 1 year then? And then you would imagine them, like, everybody knows, have you ever seen them do road work in your town? How long does it take for them to fix roads? Why? Why does it take so long to do that stuff? I mean, it's like we've regressed in some kind of way. And that's why I said, that's what leads me to believe that there was a peak of civilization at some point, and we're not there. We're on the downside of it, because like it feels like we're living in a place that was once better than this. That people were like, people who were inspired to do these kind of things, and I think the only thing that makes sense is there must be something that's left out of the story.
Didn't you do a video about a dam in Las Vegas area?
Oh yeah,
Hoover Dam. Go down that rabbit hole real quick.
Well, that was funny. That was one of my first big videos, and it was like I literally was kind of on this kind of Art Deco kind of like this is weird, all the symbolism here with all this angels and Greek gods and all this weird stuff. And I remember when I first saw that, I was like, man, it's really weird that they got those angels on that dam. Like, what is that? Like, again, you think about it. Like, so this is like during the Great Depression. They decided to put these elaborate statues. You guys have never been there. There's a memorial over at the Hoover Dam. And yeah, I affectionately call them the Dam Angels. And so they're sitting on these blocks over at the Hoover Dam. Here's the crazy thing: the stats on the Hoover Dam is that like this is like it's got like more concrete than almost any place other than like one of the Great Pyramids. It's like how much weight and all this stuff. And I think Oscar James Hansen, the guy who was the sculptor who created the angels, he compared it to the Great Pyramid. Interesting. I just think it's interesting. A lot of people question what were the pyramids used for. Well, this guy's talking about a hydroelectric dam, and he's comparing it to the pyramids. Maybe that's the correlation. Maybe the Great Pyramids for energy, as this thing is. So that being said, so what we're taught is that over 100 people lost their lives when they were building this dam. And that's when I was going down this rabbit hole, and it was funny because like I was doing all these videos about like symbolism and architecture, and somebody said, do the Hoover Dam. And I was like, well, the angels are weird, but I don't really know what it means. And so it's funny, like literally my video was kind of about like, I was literally, as I was making the video, I was kind of figuring it out. I was like, oh, let's do a little detective work. So did you guys know these angels were here? Let's see if we can figure out why. So they have this star map in front of them, very Freemasonry looking, kind of symbols on it. And they have like the constellations. And it turns out the star map actually was put there almost kind of like in the way that the Great Pyramids and things like that. They would have these astronomical markers where you could actually literally, somebody could say based on the alignment of the stars at that time, when it was built to the hour. I think it was dedicated on September 30th in 1936, I believe, at 9:30 a.m. Like literally, it says that on the map. And so of course it's got all of the constellations and stuff. It's got this one symbol called Thuban, and Thuban is like from the Draco constellation. Thuban is a Arabic word that means large serpent or dragon. And of course I'm connecting. I'm like, oh, large serpents, dragons, and angels. You guys making any connections here? Of course, as a Christian, you're like, there's one angel that was called the dragon. He was called the serpent. And the crazy part, so as I was going down, I was connecting all these symbols. There's this memorial plaque there that says that it's showing this guy, and he's doing like this, and he's got wheat over his hands, and he's kind of in the water. And it says, they died to make the desert bloom. And of course, at that time, I'm like, that's a weird phrase. Like, okay, so people died building this dam. But as somebody, as I mentioned, I'm in construction. I've worked on projects where people died. Nobody would ever we would never talk about them like that. Like they had to die or this wouldn't get built. It's like that's a separate tragedy. It's like we do our best so nobody dies and we could still build the things. That's different. But when you say they died to make the desert bloom, and I'm like, that's weird because like there's not even anything really blooming around there. It's like, you guys ever been to the Hoover Dam? It's pretty bleak around there. The only thing that probably bloomed was maybe Sin City. And then I started to think like, it sounds like a sacrificial thing. There's all this symbolism. They literally dedicated, I think, the dam, the dam, I want to say it opened, or the angels were finished during like Saturnalia. There's these black cubes they're sitting on. It seems like there's this imagery to Saturn there. Saturnalia, they sacrifice people to the god of agriculture, which again, he's doing like this thing here. He's got wheat over his hands. Like I said, do they make wheat around Las Vegas? I mean, like, if they do, I didn't know it. I mean, like I don't think it's known for that. And I started to think like, yeah, there's so much weird stuff about the Hoover Dam. Like, why is this something that's always pops up in movies like the Transformers? It was like in the new Westworld movie, and interestingly enough, in the Transformers, where like they're hiding Megatron under the dam, which is funny because you have angels up there. Megatron is very similar in like the Book of Enoch. I think third Enoch, it mentions Enoch becomes Metatron, which is like an angel, the angel of death. He's like the head angel. You got Megatron there. supposedly they're like reverse engineering him to get technology out of him. There's just something I don't know what it is. And I said I had so many videos talking about the Hoover Dam where it's like there's something more happening at this place than just a hydroelectric dam. Even I said I finally just visited there, and unfortunately they actually supposedly they had to get rid of the star map, or they had to demo it and they were going to redo it because of like water damage. Now they don't even know anybody who can do it. Like literally they just jackhammered this thing up, threw it in a dumpster, and now they're not sure if they can finish it or not. And I'm starting to wonder, like, wow, maybe they're trying to, like, in the same way, it's funny how the with the Georgia Guidestones just got destroyed, supposedly by like terrorists or something, and now they, obviously they're never going to put those back. And some people might say that's a good thing because I don't think they represented anything good. But it's interesting, like the star map does kind of point to something else being there, maybe something more significant. And if they don't ever build it back, it does seem kind of like in the same way they demo a lot of these old buildings and remove statues. And it's like, are they trying to kind of like erase parts of history to potentially tell us a different tell future generations a different history?
Sounds like you're saying, were these sites like the Hoover Dam, like the Star Fort, Fort Jefferson, were they repurposed or even, rebuilt on top of far older ancient sites that might have been on ley lines, that might have, because that's kind of what I think of when I think of that Fort Jefferson again, way out in the middle of nowhere. Why that spot?
Mm-hmm.
Was that some kind of ley line that the ancients knew of? Was there something there? And did they build later civilization build on top of it? Again, that's the common theme we see in Peru, we see in Egypt. We see the dynastic Egyptians, I believe, building on top of older ancient temples. We see the Inca building. You go to Machu Picchu, and literally you'll see small rough stone and clay mortar construction built on top of megalithic structures. Megalithic structures go up about 4 feet.
Mm-hmm.
And then all these buildings, it's just like you see the small rough stone on top. It's like, that's two completely different things.
Yeah, you can tell.
Somebody built on top of the older, and if it was the Inca, why didn't they build the whole thing out of the impenetrable, indestructible style, right?
It's so obvious when you ask that question. You know why? Because they didn't. Like,
right.
But it's interesting that I just learned this factoid out just real recently. A good way to cover up stuff would be submerge them. And of course, when you actually look at, like, as you mentioned, so when they created the Hoover Dam, they created Lake Mead. And I can't remember, I once knew all the figures of it, but so much has been submerged by Lake Mead. And I learned there was a city, an Anasazi city, so the ancient Anasazi were natives to this land supposedly, and were the Pueblo Indians and the Hopi Indians claimed to be related to them in some way. They're the ancestors. But the funny part was, like, when I actually learned what Anasazi meant, it just means ancient ones. And so who are the ancient ones? Well, nobody really knows. We just know they lived a time before here. And so when I know what everybody's picturing in their brains when they're saying there was a city under there, they're thinking like, oh, you're thinking of like mud huts and stuff like that. Well, if you go to the lakemead.gov site, it literally says that they had structures with up to 100 rooms in them. Okay, so now maybe you're picturing something different. Like, that's not a primitive society. That seems like an advanced. 100 rooms? That's a building. That's a big building. And so that's under Lake Mead. And then you think about, like, all the stuff, even, like, I think they say, like, even now there's 250-ish, I think, sites attributed to the Anasazi. Now, here's the crazy thing is, if you look up the stats, and I can't remember exactly what the stat worldwide was, but there's like 91,000 dams in the world. Like 90,800 of them are in America. It's like literally there's over 90,000 dams in America. So you think about it. Obviously, you have all these artificial lakes. What are they covering up? The answer is lots of stuff, but what are they covering up? Like I said, I gave you an example. There was an ancient city that was covered up. So what else is covered up by these lakes?
You
I mean,
mentioned
like there's literally no telling what they're covering up. I mean, because like I said again, like especially when you find out how deep these lakes are after because like literally they're flooding out these valleys that are between mountains. I think they say like even now there's been all this talk about this worry of that Lake Mead was drying up. Yeah, it's because it was dropping under 1,000 feet by the dam, so it's like it's still really deep. I mean, that's like how deep is the stuff that's really submerged? The answer is really, really deep, and like you couldn't even find. We couldn't find out what's under there.
You mentioned the Anasazi, the ancient ones. It's crazy looking at some of the artifacts pulled out of a lot of these ancient mounds in Ohio, in Florida, in Alabama, Arkansas. If you took these artifacts and you told somebody where's this from, they'd say that's a Mayan artifact. I mean, it looks that crazy. Artifacts pulled out of mounds in Ohio that look like they're straight out of Mexico. We're almost out of time. I want to ask you about one more site. You had a video about this. It was very intriguing, and that was, I think it was called Camp Hero. And
the stuff about Stranger Things.
Yeah. You were talking about the Stranger Things series and how were they actually getting their idea from this other actual site called Camp Hero. So tell us about Camp Hero. And I mentioned portals. So tell us why you think this might have been a portal.
Okay, so a good maybe reference point here is like you might have to think in your mind, like block out that idea of what you've been shown, like in movies like Stargate. Like, you think about, like, I know a lot of people are thinking like CERN. You have this big old thing and you could imagine it looking like a Stargate. But what I'm thinking, like, that maybe portals are a little different. It's more of a spiritual thing, like literally doorways that we might not be able to visualize in the way that you and I can visualize them. But so I got asked a question on my live stream the one day about Stranger Things. What do you think about that show? And I said, I think that show shows you a lot of real things. And I said, the crazy part about that show is a lot of people don't realize it's based on a true story. So, of course, I'm not saying it's true. I'm not saying the show's facts. I'm saying like that I do believe in a spiritual world. And I believe that when they showed the Upside Down, there is obviously a spiritual world that's like, it's running parallel to here. It's almost like an alternative dimension, that those beings can interact, and there's a veil where sometimes it's thin, and there's ways to pierce that, and we can interact with that, and they can interact with us. So the interesting part about that, they were originally, I think, going to call that show, I think they were going to call it Montauk, because Camp Hero is a real place. It's a former Air Force base in Montauk, New York. And at this place, they were literally doing all kinds of crazy experiments on kids, on animals. Like literally, they were kind of like that story of 11 in the show. Is they were basically abusing children, doing weird things with them. They were trying to get them to astral project and all this stuff. And then so like, if you could get somebody to astral project, if you believe in that sort of thing, which I do, I believe that is, if you could imagine your consciousness, your soul, like leaving your body and going somewhere else, it's like, I think that's showing you like you're kind of going into this spiritual dimension, and maybe that's the kind of portal thing. Now, the scary part is that like if you could go do that, the beings on the other side could likely come through too. So what this fantasy element of the show probably is showing you, like that there's this wall where you literally see things that could come straight out of the wall. Like, I don't think it probably works like that, but I think that there is definitely something happening there where the things they're showing you in the show, like literally, I think it was like Bill Clinton gave some speech, and he doesn't specifically name it, but he's literally like apologizing for things the government was caught doing in some of these places, like using radiation experiments on people. And again, like the weird stuff with the kids, like these black sites, like these 3-letter agencies are doing weird things. And of course, what's the truth about that? Well, I don't think we're ever going to get the full story about what they were actually doing, but it's similar in the way that there's stories about Jack Parsons. Jack Parsons was the guy who was credited with creating JPL, which is like the things that power NASA's rockets. And he was like from like with the 19, it's funny, like you think about the story of like Iron Man and like Tony Stark, his dad's named Howard Stark. If you see like those Marvel shows, that guy's obviously patterned after Jack Parsons. Jack Parsons got the little mustache. He's got the slick back hair. He looks just like a Stark, or the Starks look just like him. And so he's credited with not only being a rocket scientist with no formal training, but what he was actually doing was he was like literally a Thelemite, who, if you don't know what that is, that's Aleister Crowley started this branch of like this Satanism basically, and he was the Ordo Templis, something like that. They were basically a Thelema, and so like a Thelema was like a disciple of Aleister Crowley, and they were doing this thing called the Babylon Working, where they were trying to open up a portal to summon the Whore of Babylon. Now that sounds like a conspiracy there until you look it up, and yeah, supposedly they were trying to open a portal through sun worship and all kinds of weird stuff. Like that happened. I mean, was the portal opened up? I don't know. I mean, of course, people, some people say yes, some people say no, but I think that there is obviously something more where it's like that whole, you guys remember that first Thor movie when Thor is telling the one scientist, it's like, your ancestors called it magic, you call it science. He's like, where I come from, again, the thunder gods telling him they're one and the same. And so like the science is basically magic explained, because if I never told you how I did the trick, it's magic. If I explain it to you, it's a scientific process. But I think that what they don't tell you is that at these black sites, they are one and the same. They're doing weird ritualistic things in order to get science. And that's what people wonder. It's like, so is that what they're doing over at CERN when they have literally, it's built on the temple, like the property is where the Temple of Apollyon was, Apollo. They got a Shiva statue. They do weird ritualistic things there with like, even like with the Gothard Tunnel right there, where they have the most bizarre opening ceremony. They have like Dark Matter Day there, literally on October 31st, when the veil's the thinnest. Like all the weird things that they do, and you're like, well, that's weird if this is a scientific place. But again, there's examples of this all over the place. Is that how you really contact the other dimension, the other side?
Yeah, if it was just a boring scientific machine that was, trying to slam particles together, why in the world do they have all the symbolism of this occult world? The Shiva, the god destroyer, massive statue out front. But then, even that ceremony that you just referenced that was, on video, what were they reenacting in that?
The Gothard Tunnel one? I mean, obviously they have some kind of goat thing. And again, it's like that, I believe that biblically, and I think like the book of Enoch and stuff like that will back this up, is like that, like I think that goat deity is like, is that Cernunnos? It's like Cernunnos is likely almost he's kind of a parallel version of Pan. So Pan's the kind of like the goat demon in like the Greek and Roman mythology. And then you have like biblically, you have Azazel, who's associated, he's like the scapegoat. He's literally mentioned in the book of Leviticus. And then at CERN, you have like kind of in that part of Europe, they had a being called Cernunnos. And he's basically the exact same, except for he's like a deer. Like that's the only difference is like that instead of a goat, it's a deer.
Yeah.
And you're like thinking like, is that why it's called CERN? Is it because of Cernunnos? And I think the answer is yes, because the things they did, again, like we're kind of taught like after the Age of Enlightenment, they realized all this mythology and religion was all made up. Well, why would a scientist ever want to be associated with that weird stuff? Again, I always ask the same question about NASA. It's like, well, okay, so why don't they name their rockets after the Apostle Paul? They're going to name it after Artemis and Apollo. Like, why, if we're kind of like Western culture's kind of Christian, I think most people would admit. They wouldn't like to admit it, but it's true. So, like, why wouldn't they name it after Moses or somebody like him? Then name it after Saturn or some kind of other. In case you guys didn't know, all the planets are named after deities from other religions. So it's like, why is there this association? Because you think if I was an atheist, I would want to have anything to do with religious symbols, real or false, like the way you view them. But for some reason they do, and I think it's a good example of they're not telling you the full truth about this stuff.
Interesting. Well, JT, thanks for your time. How can people follow you? I know we kind of already talked about your channels, but give us the official websites. Tell us where they can watch your documentary film also, and follow you on social media.
Yeah, sure. So I would say that if you like the kind of long form stuff, check me out on YouTube, JT Follows JC. That's pretty much how I go on every social media app. I'm Joe Telford on Facebook if you want to follow me there. If you follow me on pretty much anything, you can find a link tree. You see all the links. But yeah, I mean, I know that if you guys like Derek, which I know you do because you're listening to this, he talks about megaliths and giants and angels and all that weird stuff. So I did a documentary, like I said, as I was curious about ancient aliens, I basically gave the counterpoint of view of like, the gods were the sons of God. And we did a movie called Ancient Angels. You can see that at ancientangelsmovie.com. And so, we talk about megaliths, giants, all the weird things that were the hidden history, true history. And so if you guys find me, that's basically kind of what I like to talk about. I know that Derek and I don't talk about the exact same things, but we're interested in the same things, I believe.
Well, man, thanks again for your time. This has been a great, insightful interview, and we'll do this again in the future. Sound good?
Absolutely. Of course, I'd love to do it.
Life and existence remain as great and unexplainable mysteries. And yet, while it seems we are wandering aimlessly through time and space, there is a pattern and a design. We are heading in a direction and toward a conclusion, and there are answers to our deepest questions, perplexities, and curiosities. If we just take the time, we can discover them by following the footprints of our ancestors left in the sands of ancient history. This is the Colosseum, one of the world's most recognizable structures. In its time, it was a functional arena of blood sports. When it was completed in the year 80 AD, the Colosseum bookmarked for all time what has become the most enduring symbol of the fabulous Roman Empire. But while the Colosseum recorded in human history the nature and spirit of those times, few have realized that only 10 years later, in the year 90 AD, God himself would hand down to a simple fisherman from Galilee the most remarkable, the most incomprehensible prophecy of the future of the human race. His name, the Apostle John. The writing, the Apocalypse. Since the inscribing of the apocalyptic warning, men throughout the Christian age have been trying, at their own peril and with little success, to pry into the exact meaning of the codes and symbols of this astonishing and perplexing book. The fact of the matter is that much of the interpretation of these veiled codes must be understood in the light of human history, and therefore must be distilled out as we sift through the sands of time. Journey with us as we travel through time and space, traversing the ancient ages, seeking to uncover the exact meaning of the two most mysterious figures of the apocalypse, the beast and the false prophet. And I saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And here is the mind that hath wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. And there are 7 kings. 5 are fallen, and 1 is, and the other is yet to come. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space. And the beast that was, and is not, even he is the 8th, and is of the 7. What are we to make of this riddle? The interpretation of the riddle strangely begins here in San Francisco. The nations of the world were weary, shaken to their foundations, and humbled to submission by the devastation and catastrophic effects of World War II, were willing and eager in their quest for world peace to surrender a degree of their national sovereignty to the grand idea of a new world governing body. the United Nations. Here they sailed in 1945, ships from the four corners of the globe, under this famous bridge to San Francisco, where they put hand to pen and signed on to the Charter of the United Nations, the Golden Gateway to the New World Order, and the eighth head of the Beast of the Apocalypse. Having spent more than 2 decades unlocking and decoding the secrets of these ancient mysteries, is author and film producer Ken Klein.
There are some absolutes that we can know and be certain about as it pertains to where everything's going. There is a predictable, absolutely certain finality that will come as the result of the mystery of iniquity, the mystery of lawlessness running its full course. It's as certain as gravity. We know that we live in a world that isn't just having evil about, but it's a malignant evil. It's an evil that is driving the world to a conclusion, an apocalyptic conclusion. Now, if you're a student of the Word and you understand Thessalonians, it says to us, and we have this, we can appropriate this promise, that though the world will be taken as a thief in the night, the world won't understand the coming of the Lord. It'll come on like suddenly, like a thief in the night. The Scripture promises us that believe in the Lord Jesus, that that day will not overtake us as a thief. We will see it coming. There's some signs that you can be looking for that will indicate the nearness of my coming. Now, you've read Matthew 24, Luke 21, Mark. You've read about, the earthquakes and the famine. Okay, we're tired of that, those signs. All right, we got that, right? We got the earthquakes and the famine. We know that. Amen? Shake your head. I know that one, yeah. Don't give me the earthquake routine again. But tonight I want to talk to you about a sign that you've never seen. But tonight I want to talk to you about a sign that you've never seen. Jesus said to his disciples, I'm telling you these things now, so that when it comes to pass, you know that I spoke. The whole motive for prophecy is to develop our faith. Well, I'm telling you now so that when it comes to pass, you'll see that I spoke, and it's going to minister to your faith. And so tonight, I'm going to bring you to a sign, probably the most astounding sign you've ever heard or seen in your experience in the Lord in relationship to the awesome time of his return. I want you to turn with me to Revelation 13. This scripture has to do with the great beasts of the Bible. Revelation 13 talks about 2 beasts, and I'm gonna just, you can just listen to me and then we're gonna read together. This first beast is a beast that comes up out of the sea. That beast has 7 heads and 10 horns. And then later, there's a second beast that comes up out of the earth. And this beast has 2 horns. It looks like a lamb, and it speaks like a dragon. Now tonight, we're going to be studying Revelation 13:11, the second beast. Now, I want to ask you a question. I do this wherever I go. Apart from my book, and I wrote a book on this called The False Prophet, because that's what this second beast is called later in Revelation. Apart from my book, I'm going to poll you here. How many of you have ever heard or read a book, apart from mine? Mine doesn't count. If you read my book, you don't cheat here. How many of you ever have heard any preaching or teaching on the second beast of Revelation 13? Raise your hand. Really? Maybe out of this crowd, maybe 50 people. There's probably, I don't know, 800 or 1,000 people here? I don't know. I can tell you that's a lot. But think about how many don't. Think about the 750 that have never heard. Now, when I travel the country and speak on this issue, I'm telling you that about 2% of the people respond, which means 98% of the people have never heard. Now, would you say that's a fair amount of people that are in the dark about something this significant? Wouldn't you say? And so basically for thousands of years we've been sitting here not knowing anything about, or very little about, this scripture. But tonight I'm going to open this up to you, because it literally is the missing piece that will help flesh out your Christian worldview. Your worldview. Okay? And that's what we're working on tonight. That's where Satan's fighting today, is on our worldview, our Christian worldview. It's being eroded. That's where the attack is today. Okay. Now, let's read together these 8 or 9 scriptures in Revelation 13:11. And I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spoke as a dragon. And he exercises all the authority. You might want to put a circle around that word all. I'm going to come back to it later. He exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence. And he makes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, whose fatal wound was healed. And he performs great signs, so that he even makes fire come down out of heaven to the earth in the presence of men. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth because of the signs which it was given him to perform in the presence of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who had the wound of the sword and has come to life. And there was given to him to give breath to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast might even speak and cause as many as do not worship the image of the beast to be killed. And he causes all the small and the great and the rich and the poor and the free men and the slaves to be given a mark on their right hand or on their forehead. And he provides that no one should be able to buy or sell except the one who has the mark, either the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for the number is that of, the right translation should say the number is that of man, not a man, but man. The number is that of man. And his number is 666. Now,